Welcome to a new episode of the piXL Drone Show. And this week we are joined by Brady Reisch, and Brady is with Autel Robotics. And Brady has a background in drone flying, which he's going to talk to us about very shortly. We've got a lot of questions for him about Autel in general, what he does at Autel, and especially the Dragonfish project. I met Brady 2 weeks last week. It was early last week, and we got to a chance to look at the drone in itself and see how it was flying. So I get a lot of questions for him. So Brady, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. Really appreciate it.
So I guess my first question to you is, tell us a little bit about your aviation history. How did you get into flying drones, and what did you do before you joined Autel?
Sure, absolutely. So, I actually come from a AEC or a BIM background. I was actually a draftsman for an architecture firm originally, and as I'd been doing that for a few years, I had found that there was a lot of need, essentially, to do photogrammetry specifically with exteriors and get existing conditions for buildings. Makes it far easier for a draftsman if you have a point cloud that you can run lines with, figure out how long the building is, where the windows are, et cetera, et cetera. It just makes it so much easier rather than going into the field and manually measuring every little aspect. And there's always something you miss. So having something you can go back upon and be able to, check your measurements again, or, oh, I forgot to do this one thing. You have a model that you can go through and run those measurements on after the fact as well. So I found it was very, very intriguing to me as a draftsman. So I got into the drone world essentially to go through and assist our architectural firm. I ended up getting hooked up with a couple different training companies, and then over the past 4 years, it's just been growing. Meeting new people and discovering new things and new technologies. How the drone world essentially is changing everything, every aspect of every vertical. And then right as COVID kind of started to get kind of bad, our architectural firm had to lay a couple people off. Unfortunately, I was one of those individuals, but thank goodness Autel was actually right on the back burner there, and they'd said, hey, we need someone that helps with public safety, because I'd been helping a couple different training companies with public safety, EMS, military, fire, things like that. And they essentially hired me. So now I am the enterprise support agent for Autel Robotics. I am also in charge of the training and going to trade shows, which is why I'm in this lovely car and unfortunately not in the studio like everybody else. But that's kind of where we're at.
Outstanding. Well, we appreciate you taking the time in your car before going to the show to talk more. Tell us a little bit more. When I was at the booth at Autel last week, you guys had a new RTK module to put on the Evo 2. Can you tell us a little bit more about this? Because I haven't really seen much information about this. I know I talked to you guys about it, but I want you to tell our listeners a little bit about what's coming around with the Evo 2 platform.
Absolutely. So the Evo 2 RTK is actually a separate aircraft. Aside from the Evo 2, it has the same internals, guts, most everything is the same. Really, the difference is that there's a new housing, there's new cables internally in order to connect to the main PCB, which allow the RTK signal, basically to get written to the image, right, from any of your capturing. So the Evo 2 RTK is a separate aircraft. It's got all the same characteristics as the Evo 2, but it is a separate aircraft. So it's not something that's going to be modular to existing Evo 2 aircraft. It would be a separate one that would have to be purchased. Essentially just goes right on the top. You've got two little thumb screws to get it connected and put on. So for anyone who doesn't really understand what the RTK specifically is about, it's about higher precision, right? When you're trying to go through and capture something for photogrammetry, if you want to repeat missions, say you're flying over a mine or a quarry, and you want to have the exact repeatable flights through your waypoints to make sure that over time it's going to be in the exact same position, the RTK is the way to go, because it's going to be higher accuracy to keep the aircraft where it was previously on the last waypoint mission.
For a lot of people that don't precisely understand how accuracy is important and how RTK is better and different from let's say the more traditional ways of doing this, can you tell us a little bit more about that as well, and how accurate and how precise RTK can be?
Sure. Absolutely. So typically, when you have an aircraft in the air, you're going to be connected to GPS satellites. What it's going to
Yeah.
try to do is triangulate your location, so you have a pretty good, um, pretty good area as far as your X and Y go, which means your horizontal, front, forward, back, left, and right. But you don't have a very good Z accuracy to the ground because you're triangulating from something that's many miles in the sky to translate to your aircraft, which then makes an estimated or a projected point. What happens with the RTK is that you can actually connect to ground base stations as well, which give you a higher level of accuracy. So you can be within a couple centimeters very easily without the need of additional equipment.
Can we expect the ability to add more modules on top of that drone, remove the RTK module and maybe put something else on top?
So very possible to have something like that in the future. What I will say is go watch some of the Autel videos, and there may or may not be a few teasers in there to watch, but nothing's currently been announced.
Okay, all right, that's what I was hoping. The one thing I want to talk about, this is I think a kind of a centerpiece to this podcast, is Dragonfish. Can you tell us more about this? The reason I wanted to bring you on board because I was so impressed with this drone when we were out there, and to me, I'll tell you what was impressive, and you can tell me more about maybe the development and more about the drone behind it. This is a VTOL aircraft that is pretty large. The wingspan is pretty large, and this thing has the ability to basically take off like any VTOL aircraft vertically and then transition to smooth horizontal flight. But something that I have never seen before in eVTOLs is the ability to transition so smoothly from vertical to horizontal and back to vertical. So tell us a little bit more about the drone in itself, who it's intended for, kind of maybe a little bit of background about how it was developed and who the customer base is going to be. I know it's a lot of questions and I can ask those again in the future, but yeah.
No problem. So yes, so the Dragonfish, I guess I should say a VTOL specifically for anyone who may not understand what it means. So it's vertical takeoff or landing, commonly referred to as vertical takeoff and landing, but it's actually or. So essentially what will happen is that with this Dragonfish, it's a very large aircraft. You're looking at about a 6.5 to 7 foot wingspan. It's very large. And with the vertical takeoff and land, the wingtips will actually tilt up and it will launch vertically, just like it would with an Evo aircraft or any other quadcopter that you have. Now, what is special about the Dragonfish is that once it reaches its predetermined altitude of say 150 or 175 feet, right? Then what's going to do is that it's going to transition those props where they're on the wingtips. Actually, they'll start to tilt forward to allow forward flight. So you have two props on the center fuselage, and then you have one prop on each side of the aircraft on each of the wingtips. So essentially, it is a quadcopter, but then it will transition. The two on the fuselage will actually aim forward, and then you have your props on the wingtips that are actually tilted forward as well. And it'll actually help with that forward momentum. So this aircraft then becomes a fixed wing aircraft and becomes extremely efficient. In its fixed wing mode, you'll actually see about a 2-hour flight time with the aircraft. When it's in its quadcopter mode, you're looking at about 45 minutes, so it's far less efficient. But the amazing thing about the Dragonfish is that you cannot stall. We had plenty of questions when we were out at the Robot Summit. Of how slow can it go? You know, what's the slowest speed? Well, technically it's 0. It doesn't have to go anywhere because it's a quadcopter. As it will actually go through, if you fall below 38 miles per hour, it will start to transition those props on the wingtips actually up to help keep it aloft. So even if you go slower than that, you're not able to stall the aircraft. It will continue to fly or remain in the air as long as you have enough battery life to do so.
Yeah, that's what's so impressive. Sorry to cut you off. It was just so impressive to see this thing just transition from one to the next, and then the speed that it was going at. What's the max speed on this thing?
Max speed is going to be 68 miles per hour. That's through the software. That does not take into account the wind. So we've had it up to just about 70 miles per hour going with the tailwind. But of course, the aircraft will determine that. It will try to compensate and slow down to make sure that it is flying within the parameters that you've set through the software.
And of course, the payload is important in here, which is you have several cameras on board of the aircraft and several options, right, to put on. Tell us a little bit more about the payload.
Sure. So right now there's going to be 2 at launch that we currently have. The first one is going to be our dual sensor. This is a 48 megapixel wide image sensor and a 20 times 4K zoom, and that's it's a 4K 20 times optical zoom and a 240 times digital zoom on this camera. So it's incredible to, when you're flying at 400 feet, it feels like it's right in front of you at 20 feet. It's ridiculous. Wow. And that's essentially the dual payload. We also have a triple payload, which just also includes a thermal imager, which is a 640 by 512 30 hertz thermal sensor as well. And you can swap between any of those cameras. Yeah.
Question I have for you, Brady. Who specifically is this drone designed for? Like, what is your core customer base? What kind of organizations or customers are you guys looking to sell this drone to?
Sure. Primarily, this is going to be for public safety. This one's going to be for border patrol, government sector, really high-end enterprise. It is an aircraft that is not designated as a mapping drone per se, but it has a lot of the mapping capabilities. And with the amazing cameras that we're able to include, and different cameras that are coming on our roadmap to allow different things, this can also be used for large area surveying. If you have large corridors from a large highway project, say in the middle of the Nevada desert, you can go through and map incredible amounts of land in order to make sure you've got all the appropriate, things that you'll need to fulfill that project. So primarily at this time is specifically for public safety, and we'll be diving into a lot of the construction surveying and things like that at a future time along our roadmap.
Yeah. And I saw on the website also that you have a transmission range of 18.6 miles. I mean, that's incredible, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that distance. Is that, how does the landscape impact that range and affect the video quality? But also, I can imagine in most countries, especially here in the US, flying beyond visual line of sight, of course, is a regulatory restriction as well that we deal with.
Correct. Yes. So at this time, the Dragonfish is not qualified as a BVLOS certificated aircraft. So we are working on, as an aircraft, trying to get that certification. So at this time, I have not had it beyond visual line of sight. We've got a couple of corridors where I live, and I'm just waiting for another unit to get sent to me so that we can really push it to its limits to test everything. But it has been tested basically overseas in different areas. And from what I've heard, because I haven't seen it myself, they've had amazing signal no matter where they've been. And while we were at the Robot Summit, we even swapped between having the base station, which gives us that 18.6 miles, to just using the aircraft and the remote. So you're going to cut that in about half. So you're looking at about 9 miles. We had no transmission problems, period, wherever we went. We always had our line of sight where we were, but we tried stepping behind trees. We tried getting different obstacles and things in front of us and between the aircraft while still maintaining visual line of sight. And it was flawless. We had no transmission drops whatsoever.
And I can tell you the quality of the image was just so impressive. Coming to the TV, they had this hooked up with an HDMI cable to a big TV, and the quality of the image was just so impressive from this drone that's flying extremely fast, right around doing a circle. I was very impressed. Can you tell us about the back end, the software in itself? Because I know there's a lot of capabilities inside of the software. This thing flies fast, obviously, because it's flying as a fixed wing aircraft. Tell us about what you can do inside the software for those agencies that need to use this kind of drone.
Sure. We've got several different automated options that we have allowed at this point. We have our typical waypoint, which you can fly with any aircraft. We also have mapping options. If you'd like to do a wide area mapping, you can set those up. And what's really unique about the Dragonfish is that we actually have a couple different options in order to track different things in the area using the UI software. So there's really, we like to say there are 3 levels of tracking that you essentially have. Number 1 is that you can drop a pin anywhere on the map, and it will actually circle or loiter around that area. This is a quick mission. And what that allows you to do is keep the camera focused on a specific area, right? this will give you a GPS coordinate on the map, and it will just circle around that specific spot. The second level is that you can track inanimate objects. For example, if you've got a big container out in the middle of a field, you can go through and select that container, and it will keep that container in the frame and watch where it's at. There's no dynamic zoom in that case because it doesn't recognize what that object is, which then leads us into our third level where it will recognize things. People, it'll recognize animals, cars, boats, motorcycles, bicycles, things like that. And when you select the third option, or when it says, hey, I know what that is, that's Greg running out in the field, right? So it will be able to dynamically track that and move around. As you move, the aircraft will move and loiter around your area and predict kind of where you're going. So if you go behind some brush and then you basically emerge on the other side, it will reacquire you as a person and say, hey, I recognize what I was doing before. So it's able to track incredibly well. And we've got some videos coming out that showcase that.
Does the drone have any kind of obstacle avoidance built in as well, or is it all on the pilot in this case?
So it's actually going to be all on the pilot at this point. It does not have obstacle avoidance because of how fast it is traveling. Yeah. The technology isn't quite there yet. It is something we are still looking into to see if we can develop different accessories that we can mount to the outside of this current generation to allow some sort of obstacle avoidance. But what we do have is that there is terrain following with what happens. So if you think of when you look at Google Maps, for example, you get a lot of topographical information. You see where there's a hill, where there's kind of some trees. It's the same thing. It's going to download a mesh map to the aircraft and say, hey, here's the terrain. And I want to make sure that we're not going to run into the terrain. So when you go forward, say 600 feet, we have an elevation change of 100 feet. We're flying at 400 feet total. I want you to basically climb up 100 feet extra by the time you get to that 600 foot mark. So then you're flying 400 feet above the ground level. So it's not aware of the ground. It's just basically preloaded information. So you do have to have some sort of a cellular or Wi-Fi connection to download those maps. But it is terrain following.
That's pretty impressive. And I see on the side as well that it comes apart. So in case you're having to move the drone from one location to the next, you can take it apart into pieces and travel with it, or?
Absolutely. So it is something that you can do with a single person. Far easier to have two people if possible. And the reason is, as you take the wings apart, because that's essentially the largest span or the longest area there, you've got little clips that you're able to undo. You can undo one, take it off, but you have to tilt the aircraft to let it sit on the other side, on the other wing, before you go through and take it off. So if you have two people to take it off on both sides, it's much better. The tail section comes off very easily. There's two buttons on the top and bottom. You basically click them and then pull out the tail. And then the gimbal connects pretty much like any other gimbal system. There's a locking button that'll snap in as it connects.
Yeah. Now, a fixed wing drone that is able to take off and land vertically, of course, uses the aerodynamics much better and has a much longer flight time typically than what we see with quadcopters. Do you think a design like this will ever make its way into a more consumer-friendly model where we, let's say, get an Evo 3 that might incorporate some of these features and have a fixed wing while also being able to land and take off vertically? Or is that something that's not going to happen?
It's very possible to have something that is going to be smaller. We did showcase actually our 5 kilogram Dragonfish while we were at the same show. We're still waiting on some of the information, but it's a miniaturized version with reduced flight time, same payloads, just a smaller airframe. So miniaturizing that even more at this point, I am sure it's somewhere on the list of things to do that I'm not aware of, and of course they don't tell me because they don't want me to spill all the beans. But certainly while we're doing the larger aircraft for public safety and for governmental use and things like that, we are able to start to develop smaller and smaller options for the consumer market. So it's something that's very possible.
And that other prototype had a VTOL design in the back. Is that right?
Yes, correct. And that's a little more reminiscent of our the Kestrel that we announced a long time ago. That's really morphed into the Dragonfish. So the VTOL is going to be the design for that smaller aircraft, and I'm sure it's got different dynamics on its flight. We don't have a working model here, so it hasn't been something that's been tested yet. It's just something that we had on display.
Awesome. Let's talk about remote ID. We've been talking about remote ID with pretty much every single one of our guests on the show. How is Autel, if you can share, working on developing remote ID? You know, this is a question we get from customers all the time, at least at Pilot Institute. Is my drone going to be remote ID capable? And what is the approach? Can we expect current Autel drones, if you know that information, to be compatible in the future with remote ID?
So at this point, we don't know if it will be compatible or not. There's still speculation as to how exactly everything's going to be transmitted. To my knowledge, that information has not been passed along to Autel yet, with the specific frequencies, securities inside of how to get that information transmitted out. Yes, we're aware it's going to be something hardware-wise that's going to need to be done in order to broadcast that location. So as of now, to my knowledge, we haven't received that information, so we're waiting on the FAA to get more details to us so that we can make a public announcement. Hopefully, it is going to be something that's going to be fairly simple in order to create some sort of a hardware option to affix to the Evo 2 or the Evo aircraft or even the Dragonfish at this point. But to my knowledge, we haven't received that information. So hopefully soon. Hopefully, we'll be able to make a public announcement.
Yeah, I think that's the same for pretty much every company out there, waiting for the standard to come out to get a bit more information.
Right, exactly.
Cool. Question I have over the about the Evo 2. I mean, that drone's been out now for some time. Are you guys working on a successor? And is there anything you can tell us in terms of what you've learned from the Evo 2 and where you think that there's room for improvement for a future model? I mean, I don't know. Obviously, you might not be able to share everything, but I mean, can you share some of the
Sure. There's always going to be something else in the works, right? No matter what.
Yeah.
To this point, I don't know what exactly that looks like. That information has not been shared with me yet. But I mean, Autel is here for the long run. It's something that we're going to continue to innovate and continue to make new devices with new features and functions. So I really, with the Evo 2, we've learned a lot about. We don't always have to go smaller. From the Evo to the Evo 2, we went larger, and we had great success with that because we're able to have a much longer flight time. We've got 38 minutes as our baseline for the Evo 2 aircraft. So for something that folds, that's small enough to stick into a backpack, carry a couple extra batteries. You can use the smart controller that we're coming out with. You can use just the original controller that it has. You don't have to use a smart device. There's no geofencing. There's no accounts that you have to create or activation. Basically, your data is all your data. So you can fly with just the aircraft with no internet connection and still be able to, get cinematography. You're still able to capture beautiful imagery and videos with just the controller because you can see what the camera sees on the controller itself. And when I was speaking with John a little while ago, he mentioned that no one had ever told him there's a display button on the back of the remote that you can press to see what the camera sees. So you don't have to have a smart device. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And maybe we haven't done enough promotion about that. But it's a fantastic product.
If you go ahead, Kara, go ahead.
No. Go ahead. Hi.
No, I was going to say, I mean, I've flown the Evo 2 a couple of times, and what always kind of struck me is that if you look at the design of the drone, and I think no drones are always particularly beautiful in any sense, but this one seems very functional, and especially the size and the weight of the battery seems to have played an important role in the design of this drone. How important is flight time for your customers, and does it matter from one group of customers to the other? I mean, are people in, let's say, search and rescue more interested in drones with extended flight time than, let's say, somebody who's into photography necessarily? Or like, it seems like it's been such an important feature of the drone. Can you tell us more about that, perhaps?
Yes. So the flight time is actually incredible among all verticals, right? So as you mentioned specifically, with search and rescue, you're able to stay out longer. You don't have to swap out the batteries nearly as often, which means that you can cover larger areas before coming in for a battery swap. And as a photographer, when you're out there, if anybody's into digital photography or analog photography, if you've got, a separate camera, well, do I need to capture more images so I get that perfect shot, or do I need to focus and take more time in order to get that perfect shot the first time, right? You've got that option because you have extended battery life. You're able to stay up longer. You're able to make sure you've got everything you need before you come back. So battery life really across all verticals is fantastic to have a higher flight time available to you.
Kara, did you have that question?
Yeah. I like how you said that bigger is better, because I do see a trend where other drone manufacturers are trying to go smaller and more compact. And I'm not trying to draw any line of conclusion, but would you say that Autel is looking at strictly appealing to the more professional drone user versus the more recreational or hobbyist user just because of that? Because I have flown both the Autel Evo 2 Pro and the standard, and one of my first observations was that the app, the way it's laid out, it's definitely something that would appeal to someone that knows their way around a DSLR or a camera already. So would you feel like it was safe to say that, pushing forward, you're going to focus more on professional users, especially since you're not going towards more compact type casual drone?
Yes. So our focus really has been for our enterprise level clientele, right? In order to produce for higher level standards to make sure that we've got aircraft that are going to be suitable in all situations, right? So even small aircraft can be utilized by enterprise users. Each aircraft and each manufacturer have their own place for each of their aircraft and what they excel at. And there's always going to be flaws for every single aircraft. There's not one aircraft that's perfect for everybody, which is why it's important to have multiple aircrafts for different scenarios, right? If I'm going to, if I want to go through and fly, say, photogrammetry for a construction site, I've got the Evo 1 that if I'm getting into a hairy situation, I'm like, there's a chance it might hit something, but I have to get this, right? I've already weighed the consequences if something was to happen. I'd rather fly my Evo 1 and hit something than my Evo 2. But if I need to get something that's very precise and very accurate, I'm going to use my Evo 2 because of the larger sensor. Same thing goes if you're trying to fly indoors. I would much rather fly my Evo 1 in that case, which is, an older generation, so the camera's not as good. However, you're kind of weighing the risks involved in that flight. So having a smaller aircraft does not necessarily say that it's not a enterprise level aircraft, but with the way that the drone industry has been going, with most everything going smaller, a lot of the other manufacturers are focused on the consumer market rather than the enterprise or commercial market. So if we were to come out with something that was smaller, it would still be focused in order to come to a lot of that enterprise and commercial side of things.
Oh, I was just going to ask about the smart controller. You brought it up, and I had it on my list to discuss. I got to hold it, and I was actually, I've been following it because I reported on it a couple of weeks ago. I was afraid that it was going to be too big because of and I know you can never have too much screen, real estate. But I was actually surprised. It fits really well in the hand. It feels really comfortable. I know the Dragonfish controller is even bigger. Can you tell us a little bit about the controller in itself? Who do you think it's going to be targeted to, and maybe some of the specs? And then also, is it going to be compatible with using any other apps? Because I think that's one of the biggest complaints from the DJI controller at the moment, is that it's hard to actually install third-party apps. So tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So originally there was a lot of speculation saying that the Dragonfish and the Smart Controller were going to have the same control. And that's not true. They're two separate controllers. So if you've seen one, you have not seen the other one. And as you had mentioned, yes, the Dragonfish is much larger. It's for enterprise. It's best to set it down on a tripod because it does get weighted and heavy. With the Smart Controller for the Evo 2 series, it is going to be slightly smaller, something that can fit inside of the GPC cases, so your rugged bundles. That'll basically just slip underneath of all the foam. There's a way to remove all the thumbsticks so that it's just a lower profile. It's a great product, and I can't wait for it to get out into people's hands to have reviews and take a look at everything. So we're looking at a 2000 nit brightness, which is incredible, incredible for something this size. So we had to compromise a little bit and make the battery slightly larger. So when you hold it, there's two little handles on the right and the left that house all the batteries, and that's just to make sure that you have enough battery life to run that 2000 nit screen. Yeah. So you're looking at about a 4.5 hour battery life with everything charged up. Now, on top of that, you can charge it while you're using it. You don't have to basically stick it in your room and let it charge overnight. You can take a portable power pack and just leave it plugged in to extend your range as much as you need. So the Smart Controller, you're able to remove the antenna and basically replace the antenna with anything else. If you have an antenna array on a vehicle, if you've got a search and rescue vehicle or a command center for a police department, you can plug in the cables directly to the remote and get extended range if you need to. It's really incredible when you get your hands on it to understand, what it's like and what it does. Yeah, you had a question.
No, I was just checking it out on the website, and it says it's available for pre-order, but at the same time, it's also already sold out, the Smart Controller. Has it been that popular that so many people have tried to get one, or are you guys also dealing with COVID restrictions or reduced workforce or supply chain issues? And if so, can you perhaps elaborate a little bit about that as well?
Sure. Absolutely. So as of right now, we are still working with supply chain issues. Across the world, everybody's having issues with trying to get the chips and specific things for electronics. So it is something that is something we're trying to deal with right now. As of right now, Autel, we have sold out of essentially our pre-orders that we have set up. However, you are able to purchase it through any of our other authorized dealers. So certainly give them a check and basically contact them because they have a separate pre-order that you're able to go through and do. It's all the same price. It's level pay between all of our authorized dealers in the U.S. So check out auteldrones.com and click on there's an authorized dealers tab.
Cool. That's good to know.
I remember we did a podcast a few weeks ago with someone from DJI, and he was saying how geofencing was a positive feature to have. And I know that a lot of people gravitate towards Autel because they like that lack of geofencing. And they also like the fact that you don't necessarily need to log in online just to go ahead and take off and fly. Do you think that's going to be something that's here to stay, or as remote ID kicks up, do you think you're going to have your own type of geofencing solution? You may not know the answer to that, but I thought I'd just ask.
So as far as Autel stands at this point, we're not geofencing, right? We don't want to essentially hold your hand to say yes or no, you cannot fly because of your local regulations, because we operate in the U.S., we operate in Canada, we operate in Mexico, in Asia, in Europe, so all over the world, and everybody has their own rules, right? On what is controlled airspace, what kind of authorization do you need? So Autel stance is just one extra thing that causes a headache. As a pilot, if I want to launch right next to an airport, I've got my FAA authorization in the U.S. I don't have to also ask Autel to say, hey, here, I'm going to give you my permission slip so I can go through and do this. I always like to say it's like a teenager. Do you really trust your teenager enough to go take the car out by themselves, or do they have to come and ask you to use it? Right. So we allow our customers to go through and fly as long as the local regulations do not require geofencing. So there's a couple different countries that do require geofencing, so we have to have geofencing in those areas. But mainly here in the U.S., there is no geofencing. We'll give you a notification saying, hey, just so you're aware it is controlled airspace. You say, okay, and fly anyways. You don't have to wait, which means that, if you've got a client who is really urgent and wants to make sure you can go through and fly. You don't have to sit there for 20 minutes asking for permission to do so, and hopefully getting the authorization in order to fly.
Makes sense. There's been an announcement this week that you guys are getting a new CEO. Can you tell us a little bit more about, have you met him yet, or have you received any communication internally of him introducing? Do you know him? What do you expect from a new CEO, and where do you think the company is going to go from here?
Only heard about. Oh, you still got me. So I've only heard about Randall. I haven't met him specifically, but Randall is our new CEO as of a few days ago, essentially as of June 1. And I'm really excited to have him on board. He's done a lot of amazing things through a lot of other companies, previously with DJI and a few others. So really looking forward to see what he's able to do. I'm really optimistic that he's going to propel Autel forward as an enterprise commercial solution, and make sure that we've got everybody on the same page, and try to get rid of any internal roadblocks that we currently have. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I should be having my one-on-one with him here in the next couple of days to meet him officially. So.
Follow-up question to that, a little curveball question. I know we said we didn't have curveballs, but if you were given the CEO position tomorrow, what would be the first thing that you would change at Autel?
The first thing that I would go through and change at Autel is really trying to understand the international market as well versus just the U.S. market. As the enterprise support agent for the U.S., I have limited information about what happens internationally, right? With what gets available at trade shows or what is announced at what times. I have no idea what any of that is. And sometimes we get information from people on Facebook say, "Hey, look what I saw at this show," internationally. And we have no idea until that information comes up. So probably a lot of the communications between the two. But I'm really looking forward. I think Randall's got a really good handle on it, and I'm really looking forward to see what he can do to help basically bring Autel together as a singular company, and have more.
Specifically in the enterprise market, what are some of the fastest growing sectors for drones to be used? I mean, are certain areas growing faster than others, or how does that work?
Public safety right now, the hard part with public safety is that they have a specific schedule, basically, or an annual budget that they have to go through to spend. And it's not on a normal year. It's not like January to December. So you have to be able to understand when the funds are going to be available, when the really big sell push is going to be for public safety. So at this point, we're getting close to the end of the fiscal year for a lot of public safety agencies where they have specific amounts of money, governmental grants that they have to go through and spend. So they're trying to procure a lot of that information to understand what are we going to be able to purchase as soon as our fiscal year ends. And so really we're in that cycle right now in the next couple of months where a lot of those are ending for the fiscal year. So they have to basically spend for the next year. So as of right now, it's really now is a time specifically for public safety. With governments, they also have similar fiscal years. Of course, they're always at different time frames. So we're just trying to make sure we get that lined up with product releases and what's available and be able to show that. But currently, a lot of public safety agencies are trying to stand up their programs. And that's when, fantastic training companies, come into play, wink, wink, and make sure that you're able to train those agencies on how to utilize those drones so that they don't have to continuously buy new aircraft because something crashed. Well, now they understand that the flight characteristics, how to fly something, how to go through and do their mission successfully and be able to accomplish what they need to accomplish.
Do you see the group of the Blue UAS drones? Is that a growing segment, and is that something that you guys are competing with, or are people really focused on price and features and therefore still go to Autel and DJI drones, even though they contain parts made in China, as do all the other Blue UAS, by the way?
Anyways, that's something we are working towards. We want to be able to be on that list of authorized manufacturers and be on the NDAA list. So we're actually going through the certification process for our aircraft so that we are able to comply and get listed on those, because that's very important for a lot of public safety. Blue or the NDAA compliance is required for a lot of the governmental grants. Some police departments get personal grants from individual donors who want to give away, X amount of money. They can spend that money however they want to spend that money. But if you have any governmental grant, it has to be lined up with a lot of specific things, including Blue UAS or NDAA compliance. So the sooner we're able to do that, of course, that's just going to be a much larger sector that we're able to dominate.
Would coming up with a government edition, like what DJI did, would that make sense for Autel to do, or does that kind of fit into the bigger plan, basically?
Plan is just to have a whole bunch of different types of aircraft that public safety is able to utilize. For example, with the Dragonfish and the Evo, they're two completely different aircraft, and they do two different things. They do those things very well, but they don't really overlap very much. Because the quadcopter is going to be very limited, while the Dragonfish is large and expansive. But if you've got small areas, the Dragonfish is not going to be the best option for you. It's going to be an Evo. So we don't want to necessarily isolate to a singular or maybe a couple individual units that are specified for enterprise. We want to be able to allow any of our aircraft to be utilized by enterprise, divisions of agencies and companies and things like that.
So we always ask our guests their favorite drone to fly. So what is your favorite drone to fly? And it doesn't have to be an Autel drone.
Cliche, but the Dragonfish. The Dragonfish is my absolute favorite because the automated flight modes, even the manual flight modes, you're able to fly it in fixed wing mode, and then all of a sudden start letting off the throttle, and it will start to transition back into a quadcopter and behave just like a very large Evo would. So I think the Dragonfish is one of those that, you look at the specs on paper and you're like, yeah, that's okay. That seems pretty cool. And then you see it in life and you're like, oh, wow, that's really awesome, right? It's completely different than what I had thought, and how it actually features, how it functions. So I would say the Dragonfish is probably my absolute favorite drone to fly.
So the great thing about the meeting that we had at the Reveille Ranch in Texas was the ability to actually get your hands on the drone and fly it. Unfortunately, I missed the first day of flying. I thought we could fly it again on the second day, and then we didn't. Is there going to be another opportunity for people to get their hands on at future trade shows, maybe, or other places that you know of?
Trade shows. Primarily, things are starting to open back up now. Restrictions are starting to lift, so a lot of the conventions are starting to open. ComUAV, I believe we will be at Interdrone. There's going to be a bunch. We'll be at World of Concrete next week. We won't have the Dragonfish there, but we are opening up. We are getting the Dragonfish into our dealers' hands. So if you go back to the authorized dealers and give people a call specifically, then they will be able to help set up a lot of those demonstrations and show you the flight characteristics, have you get some time on the sticks and actually do some flights. So they're getting into authorized dealers' hands now.
Awesome.
Now, a follow-up question I have on this. I mean, obviously, a VTOL fixed-wing drone is a very different type of aircraft. Is it harder to fly? Is it hard to get used to that? If, let's say, you come from an Evo 2, or is it just you get the sticks, you do what you want to do, and the drone pretty much executes it? Or how does that work?
Well, there's a couple of key differences. So when you launch, what will happen is you have a pre-designated altitude. As you basically say, climb up to 200 feet, you're flying manually, and you full stick it forward, right, to get your acceleration. Everything will transition by itself. You don't have to push anything else. So it will transition into a fixed wing. And then you just have to keep in mind that now, as you're doing it, you're an aircraft. You're not a drone, right? You have to bank into turns. You have to move. So you're kind of going between a model airplane and a quadcopter, right, on the sticks. But you still have the same controls. So if you're in mode 2, again, you have your elevation change with your left stick. You've got your lateral controls with the right stick. So you're able to go through and do all those. Really just depends on the area that you're operating. But it's very, very similar. If you're in a quadcopter mode, you don't full stick forward. it acts just like a quadcopter. When you're full stick forward going into that fixed wing mode, you then have to change your mindset into, as I'm trying to turn, I have to bank into my turns. I can't just sit still and yaw left or right. You have to bank into it.
I'm looking forward to trying one of those drones at some point. It sounds like it'd be quite the experience.
All right. Well,
we can do it. Maybe we'll get together again and do another fly day for everybody.
That sounds good. Just a piXL drone show fly day. We'll take that. All right, Brady. Well, thank you so much for your time. And again, thanks for joining us on the show. If you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe. If you're listening to us from your car, then well, good for you, and enjoy your day at work. But Brady, thanks again. And next week, actually, we're talking to Randall, the new CEO of Autel. So that's going to be exciting. We have more questions on maybe the company in itself. So I'm really excited about this. And you guys have a safe day.
Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, Brady.